Hello and welcome. You're listening to the ADHD Support Talk podcast. ADHD Support Talk is sponsored by ADDclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com to sign up for free webinars today. Hello and welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and as a productivity coach, I help overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time and more energy for what they love most. I'm a woman with ADD myself, so I have been where so many of my clients are and where so many of you are, and I've come out the other side, so to speak. So I've gone from living in that constant state of chaos and overwhelm and underperformance that we all know very well to living a life of much more success and fulfillment than I had ever dreamed possible. And I know you can share the same success yourself. You can learn more about me and what I do and the programs and services I offer at my website. That's www.coachingadvantages.com. And when you sign up on my website or text the keyword HACK, H-A-C-K, to 444-999, I'll send you my 7 foolproof productivity hacks to help you add hours of free time to your weeks by investing just a few smart minutes each day. So today I'm really excited. I have with me Judith Kolberg, and in a couple of minutes we're going to talk about the no-interruption zone. And I think it's a super important topic for our tribe, for our listeners. So welcome, Judith. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, let's see. So I'm not ADD, but many of my clients are, and I've been in business for 30 years as a professional organizer. And so I have a lot of ADD clients in my client base. And I do a podcast called Sane Brain with an ADD coach whose name is Maureen Nolan, and you can see that on SoundCloud. I'm a frequent contributor to Attitude Magazine and have a book out co-authored with Dr. Kathleen Nadeau called ADD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life, 2nd edition. And I'm recently back from a trip in Japan and Korea talking about professional organizing, the industry, and they are keenly interested in ADD.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I wanted to have Judith on because Judith's books were really helpful to me way back in the day when I was kind of getting my ADD you-know-what together. And with my son, who is now 23, trying to help him, find his way to organize things. In the early days when I was sort of on my journey, your books were very helpful. So I knew that you would have something really helpful to share with our listeners, not just about clutter, but about distractions and the importance of a no-interruption zone. So tell us what you mean by that. What is a no-interruption
Well, here's the thing. Like many of the things that I've learned, it's based on really a failure with one of my clients. So I kept trying to find these nice, small, quiet little spaces, right, for my ADD clients to get stuff done, like the study cubbies at the library. And then I found out that most of them were losing their mind.
Right.
That it was just like too quiet. And what happened was they would tell me that when they went to these quiet places, the noise in their head would get louder, like the mental to-do list or the worries or the ideas. And, it wasn't very good at all for them to concentrate and focus. So, I've learned since then that a good no-interruption zone, none of them can suspend every interruption completely.
Right.
But if you have one that suspends the most, assaultive, and your son would know a lot about this, texts and calls and emails and alerts and deep pings and tweets, just for a little while, you can put those on suspension, but also go to a place where there's a little bit of background hubbub, some noise in the background, because that blocks out the internal noise.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So, and I discovered this by talking with my clients, but also I did a little survey at Starbucks. I mean, you see these people sitting around at Starbucks, and they're getting...
That's our tribe,
That's your tribe. And they're getting this work done. It was just mind-blowing. How can you do this? I mean, there's this clatter of the cups, and there's all these voices, and there's this espresso machine that sounds like a truck coming through. I just didn't get it, So they didn't get it much either. But then what I learned was this thing about how a background hubbub can help you block out the internal noise, and it leaves the task at hand, in a sharper sort of a focus. Can you relate to that at all?
150%, yes.
There you go.
I've worked from home I've been at this for more than 12 years now, and I've worked from home, and there are days when, my office provides the right amount of sort of, and obviously I know how to set myself up, to minimize the interruptions from the computer and to, kind of turn all the notifications off and all of that. But there are some days when I really struggle to find the right, I've always got a ceiling fan going. I know, like, what kind of background noise I need to play, depending on what kind of task I'm doing, that sort of thing. But there are some days where I just need to head to my local coffee shop.
Yeah.
Some days when I'm better
coffee
off,
shops is one of those places, Yep. And there's a couple of others, Can I mention those?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So some of my clients really like hotel lobbies.
Yep.
Just first of all, there's a lot of comfortable furniture.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's quiet, but there's people coming and going, and there's this clerk at the front desk, and there's, it's not too distracting, the hubbub, but it's a little, you still feel like you're in part of the world, and, you can concentrate a little bit better in hotel lobbies. I also find out that some of my clients like to work in cafeterias or food courts at the mall, if there's still malls around you. Yep. And I have another client who just loves to park her car in a busy parking lot. Right? Not a quiet parking lot, but a parking lot like, Walmart or something where there's stuff going on.
Right.
But she's got the windows up, and it's very quiet now in cars. And we find ourselves in cars a lot. So, that's another one. And a bench in a park seems to be, obviously this depends on the weather and where you live and all that nonsense. But so those are some places. But I got to tell you that, Lynn, in addition to the where to go, what's really key, and this is what I really want to bring to the table that's new, I believe, is when to go to a no-interruption zone. I just want to emphasize it a little bit.
So tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, I know how I approach that with a client, but you tell me your take on it.
Well, here's the thing, is that, I really do want to put out there that I'm actually kind of a big fan of interruptions. I mean, you get a text that can, you can patch you into a real-time conversation that you might otherwise miss. A tweet gives you real-time information, like right on the spot. I have an ADD client who lets his students, he's a college professor, tweet him during class. So one day he got a tweet that his fly was open. Very, very crucial, real time.
That's a handy piece of information.
Right. Right. So, so I'm not like totally against interruptions, but, they can get really problematic. Ask your son, any of these millennials. I mean, they're bombarded. It's just extraordinary.
Absolutely.
So, and the issue is that ADDers, unlike me and non-ADDers, don't have the strongest executive function in the world, so bouncing back from the interruption can be incredibly challenging. And that's why I teach my ADD clients, not to get themselves set up for failure by knowing when to go to a no-interruption zone. And so here they are. If that's okay with you, I'll just mention them.
Absolutely, go, yep.
Okay. So one is, if something you're doing is like incredibly time sensitive, just a hard brick wall, deadline, due date, got to get it in, or somebody's going to get in trouble, sort of a thing. That's a good time to go to a no-interruption zone, to give yourself some adequate, devoted time there, to get stuff done so you don't miss that deadline. And another good time to go is when what you're doing is holding up somebody else, right? Like, so I have a client who's, she writes a column for an ADD magazine. I'm obviously not going to mention her name.
Right.
But, it holds everyone else up who needs to do the editing and the design work and the proofreading and all that nonsense because, she's so behind. And so it has this kind of wave effect. And that's a really sucky place to be. Like holding someone else's stuff up is terribly stressful, which just adds to the stress and anxiety that people with ADD on a deadline already have, right? So that's another good time to go to a no-interruption zone. And then a third one I would add is, if you have to learn something new or it's a very complex task then that's a good time to go to a no-interruption zone also. I mean, you know, if it's your first time learning how to use an app or software or an algorithm or even you know, the first time that you've ever used a gizmo for cleaning the window tracks out in your apartment, which I just took me a half an hour to learn, you know, then that's, you know, that could be, you got to account for the learning curve as well as the task. Right. And that might need a little bit more focus, a little bit more concentration. This is all common sense, but I love to teach my ADD clients these things to make it really, really, you know, clear when it's time to go, not just where, but when. Because otherwise, you really kind of toughen things out, and you're just making it harder on yourself. Like, why do that?
Absolutely. And that's you know, in coaching, what we are often trying to teach is self-awareness. So having some sort of I'm not coming up the right, like criterion or some, you know, some sort of something measurable, something a little bit more discrete that you can tap into to know when it's time to, you know, get out of Dodge. So I always tell my clients, like, as you were, you know, saying, when you are sort of beating yourself up against a brick wall when it comes to trying to submerge yourself in something, set a, you know, knowing yourself, paying attention to what that looks like, paying attention to what that feels like, and set a time limit for yourself. Like, I'm only going to go back to this 3 times, and on the third, you know, when I find myself going back to it the third time, I'm getting out of Dodge, you know, or 20 minutes of, you know, if I can't get my head in the game after 20 minutes, you know, I'm out. I'm going to have to go somewhere else. And then knowing, you know, where are those places that you feel the best kind of environment for the kind of work that you're doing. So that no interruptions at all, no total silence, total, you know, sterile environment is generally not a great place for us, because we create our own interruptions like internally, and they're a little bit louder sometimes than what's going on, you know, around us, and can be obviously more problematic. So knowing yourself, and then knowing what kinds of things are best in what kinds of environments, right? And sometimes being able to create that for yourself. So tell me, like, about creating a no-interruption zone.
Well, let's take this car, for instance, right? So if you turn off the car, then you've turned off a lot of the devices in which you can be disrupted, except for the good old phone. Right. So people, you know, find it really difficult to lay aside their phone. That's a really tough one. So I've developed a couple of tactics on that. One is I advise people to set an alarm on your phone just 20 minutes away, right? And now tuck the phone away somewhere where you can hear the alarm but not see the phone. So your pocketbook or your glove compartment, or, you know, also, or just tuck it under your thigh if you're just like so despondent about being separated from your phone. You know, then you have that touch to it. And now you have 20 minutes because there's nothing going to come through that phone or through the car. And then the alarm will go off. And then, you know, you can reset it for 20 minutes more, or give yourself a 10-minute break and then go back to it. So 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off. It's the phone that is mostly the source of most of the interruptions. Not everything, but a lot of them. So that's what I call putting the phone in timeout.
Okay, I like that. We could probably all do that a little more, right?
Excuse me?
We could probably all do that a little more, put our phones in timeout.
We could probably all do that a little more, yeah.
Right.
And that works just about anywhere. I have clients who wear noise-canceling headphones, and they wear them even without any music or sound coming through them. You know,
I actually tell clients to do that all the time.
Yeah. So what do you think that is?
It's a couple of things, I think. It sort of muffles what's going on around you, for one thing, so that language and whatever, you know, kind of stimulation is going on in the background isn't quite as jarring, or doesn't pull your attention as much. But it's also a big fat signal to other people, like, not to bother you. And especially if you can communicate that with the people around you. It's like, everybody in my family knows that if they, you know, and they know to very quietly open my office door because they don't know what I'm in the middle of, if I'm with a client or I'm recording, you know, as we are now. But I wear over-the-ear headphones, and that's a sign that I'm not to be interrupted. And most people instinctively won't interrupt you, but sometimes you have to train the people around you not to tap you on the shoulder or whatever.
Exactly.
Mom, right? But
right.
And you can train them, right?
I have a client who's got a sign on her door that says, "I love you so much I can't stand it, but if you walk into this office, I don't know what I'll do."
Right. I was actually just telling a client yesterday that when my kids were little, I started my business when my kids were pretty young, old enough to read, but, pretty young. So I had a sign on my door that had a list of the literal reasons that it was okay to interrupt Mommy when the door was closed, like
fire.
Broken bones, 911. Actually, I had to go with my son to fire that can't be blown out with your breath because
oh my God.
He pulled the candle thing.
Right.
Right. But I had to, like bloody noses that last more than 10 minutes, the actual production of vomit, I don't feel good, I had to have a literal list. And that alone was a deterrent, but it was a lot of conversations to get to that point.
Yep. So it does give out a great signal to people to, the other thing it does, I think, when you put on headphones, even if you're not listening to anything in them, there's just something about this tactile hugging your ear things that I think some of my clients really like too. And there's these little rituals that people engage in before they settle down to work, like putting on the headphones, putting my cell phone, turning my cell phone off, or getting a glass of water. So there's like little mini rituals that can also set you up for more productivity, as you well know.
Absolutely. And when you do them, often enough, it's a signal to your brain. It makes the transition piece easier. As you were talking earlier about the switching back and forth, transitions are difficult for people with ADHD, even small transitions. We know that ADHD is not actually a deficit of attention. It's a deficit in our ability to regulate our attention and our focus.
Right.
So when we force ourselves to focus on something or try to focus on something, but there are all these little, sort of interruptions that are pulling us away, it's much harder for people with ADHD to resist those and, choose the, quote, right thing or the appropriate thing in the moment to focus on.
Right.
So
And I want to talk a little bit in this regard of what you're raising also about bouncing recovering in the psychiatric trade, recovering from an interruption. And the latest research on this is really interesting. It says that it can take as much as 20 minutes to get back to what you were doing before mentally for some people once they're interrupted. And there's intervening, interruptions even while you're getting back to what you were originally doing. So it's like a big deal, this recovery thing, and it's harder for people with executive function issues.
Absolutely. And that's a good thing to keep in mind, right? And that's why the no-interruption zones are so important. If every time you have to recover, absolutely. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Judith.
No, that's all. I agree is all I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. So important. We all often in this sort of world, multitasking it's a hot topic, but it's also sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's one that is sort of disputed and argued about a lot. When we look neurologically, there really is no such thing as multitasking. You can really only give your full focus to one thing at a time. Now, you can do things that don't require focus or don't require, that kind of executive function energy while you're doing something else, like folding laundry while you watch TV or whatever. Yeah. But to every time you think you're multitasking, you're really switching back and forth really quickly between activities, in terms of your focus. And you are losing some sort of bandwidth every time you transition back and forth between activities in that recovery.
They're getting around. And it's, the most dramatic example of that is driving and texting.
Oh, my gosh.
It's just like such a no-no. There's a new statistic out that just came out last year that adults with ADHD are nearly 50% more likely to be in a serious car crash than non-ADDers. Just generally, let alone text.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's like, you really got to take that seriously.
Absolutely. This is good stuff. This is really good stuff. I think it's something that we all need to think about, knowing yourself, knowing when you need to head to a no-interruption zone, knowing how to create one for yourself. You mentioned something earlier about the difference about interruptions and about distractions. Do you see a distinction between those two things?
There's a little bit, in my industry, this is like you could have entire workshops on things like this.
Absolutely.
They talk about this stuff all the time. I mean, the outcome is pretty much the same, that you,
right.
you know, the task at hand, you know, you lose focus on that, or the train of thought gets pushed off the track, whether
right.
it's a distraction or an interruption. And I think the distinction I've heard is that interruptions are things that are unintentional, that happen externally to you, come at you, you know, through no fault of your own. And distractions can be more internal or external, and they're often things that you bring upon yourself. So you're on Instagram, or you're on Facebook, or you've brought yourself to these places where you've knocked yourself off your train of thought or off your task at hand. So, but I don't know. I think that's kind of hair-splitting. The outcome is
right.
still the same.
Absolutely, and it's the outcome that we're trying to avoid, right? Having to change, having to transition what we're focusing on, having to deal with the recovery, having to deal with the trying to get yourself back into focus sometimes is hard, especially on certain kinds of activities. So I think this is it's a really important topic for all of us to think about, and to really be a little bit more intentional about how we set ourselves up for success versus not. Really. Anything else you want to share with our listeners, Judith?
No, I think we got there's lots and lots of literature out there. I don't need to add to it, the millions of things you can do to cut down on distractions, but this was the contribution I wanted to make.
So much of it is self-awareness and really looking at what's going on from a more objective sort of problem-solving perspective. There are so many things that you can do to help with interruptions. I think this is wonderful. Well, tell our listeners again, how they can get in touch with you, where they can find out more about you.
Well, let's see. I have two websites. One is fileheads.net, and that's the service, the professional organizing website, fileheads.net. The other is squallpress.net. Squallpress.net is the one with the books on it, like ADD-friendly ways to organize your life and so forth and so on.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Judith. It was really nice for me to get to know you a little bit and for you to share with our listeners. And thank you all for listening. As always, I appreciate your attention, and we'll catch you next time on ADHD Support Talk Radio. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.